Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. All right, man, it's a cold and foggy morning.
First
I
or
called
last.
All right, well, welcome back. It is a cold and foggy morning here. We're in the shop. Got Dylan and Tasso with us. And for this episode of the podcast, the first thing we want to talk about, or that I want to talk about, is this new WRX TR. There's been a lot of conversation about it since it was revealed. To kind of less than stellar initial fanfare, if you will. So let's start off. Just what is your guys' initial impressions of this car?
So I mean, overall, I'd say it was a decent shot. It fell maybe a little bit short of a lot of people's expectations. I think there is a lot to be said that's good about it, as far as that chassis of 2022 plus cars.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool parts that they're adding in that now hopefully will just be able to be bolted up on any of these older, 2022 plus cars.
Sure.
So it does provide some opportunity for those people to have just like a clear upgrade path straight from Subaru if they want to, make their car handle a little better or have better brakes. So that's exciting to me because, we're going to be able to get all those parts in. We can try them out, hopefully, on our new shop car and, get a feel for, how all those things actually work.
Right.
What they've changed. But, yeah, I think a lot of people were really hoping for a bigger move towards an STI. I mean, Tasso and I were talking earlier about how it's kind of like an STI light, but they left some things to be desired by not changing anything really with the drivetrain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Tasso,
just off the cuff.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm of two minds. For a lot of the stuff that Dylan was just saying, at least it's something. It's movement,
Right.
and what I think is a pretty stagnant market right now. So that's cool. It's nice that they're taking all this part stuff off the shelf and putting it on a car at least and selling it. So that's cool. But also it doesn't really feel like a TR to me at all.
Right.
It's kind of the opposite of a TR, and that's where we were talking and we came up with STI Lite. Because a TR is a stripped down version of a WRX, not a parts added version of a WRX.
So TR is supposed to mean tuner ready, and the other time Subaru used this name was in 2006, 2007, and so that was at the time the lightest and the least expensive WRX, literally tuner ready. Like if you want to buy one of these cars and play with it, that would be the car you could
Instead
buy.
of putting nicer parts on a WRX, they put cheaper or less parts on a WRX because you're just going to take them off anyways.
Right.
So here's your slate, here's your blank slate to work with to make your cool car. We tried to save you some of the hassle, right?
Yeah.
And save you some of the cost and save you some of the weight. And instead it's, sorry about not having an STI. Would you still give us money for this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. All right, so I think everybody has this car completely wrong.
Okay.
And it's actually for exactly the reason that you just mentioned. Everybody is honing in on the name TR and they're comparing it to the previous TR. I feel like this was like a name grab, like they didn't want to just call it a WRX something, and they just grabbed a name that they had in their pocket and threw it on this car. I don't think there's any relationship between this car and the original TR. And there's been a lot of focus in that way. I think the most significant thing about this TR is actually what they didn't call it, which is they did not call it a TS, a tuned by STI. Mm-hmm. What's super interesting is like the BRZ, the up version of the BRZ, that is the BRZ TS. That car is tuned by STI, but this one is not. On top of that, the thing that's really interesting is exactly what you said, is that they grabbed a lot of the stuff off the shelf for the STI and they just put it on this car. Mm-hmm. I did not expect, especially with the Brembos, I did not expect them to grab the STI Brembos from 2 years ago and put them right on the WRX. The WRX, prior to this point, has always been like one rung below what the STI is. The WRX, the previous WRX had a Brembo option, but it was the Brembos that then the STI graduated from, the 328 and 316 millimeter kit, that the STI graduated from up to
the 6-spots.
When it went to the 6-spot. So it was kind of like the hand-me-downs from the STI.
Right.
And in this case, they put basically just the STI stuff on the WRX and the Recaro seats and everything. It's super nice. If they would have put the STI transmission in this car, at that point, short of possibly tweaking the power, it would basically be an STI.
Yeah, so this is something I haven't been clear on. What engine package does it have? What turbo does it have compared to the WRX?
Exactly the same.
Okay.
And what I wonder is if that's why they didn't put the transmission into it.
Yeah.
Because Subaru has always kept the STI badge and the STI name as something that they wanted to be like exclusive, specific to a chassis, and they wanted it to be different. Like when they came out with the STI over here, it was completely different than the WRX, and all of the things that made it completely different from the WRX, or largely a lot of them, you could not get and put into the WRX. They didn't want it. Subaru didn't want to make it easy for you to get the things that were special on the STI and put them in the WRX.
This is the thing. When I got into Subarus, I wasn't clear on. I thought to myself, I'll just, after wanting an Evo and not being able to find one of those, I'll just get a WRX because it's essentially STI minus a half liter and minus a gear.
Right.
Same.
Right.
But super not same. I have come to learn over the years.
And so my wonder is that because they didn't call it a TS, and obviously they're using the name for the BRZ. They've done it previously. They're doing it again, and that is what that means. That name, the TS, means is that Subaru Technica International does like have a hand in what the changes are in the setup of the car. So that tells me, one, that's probably not what happened in this case, but two, it leaves the door open for them to then hand Subaru Technica International a WRX, and then maybe in 2025, 2026, come out with a TS version. Or the other thought that I wonder is, are they kind of something in the back of their minds leaving the door open to come out with an STA version of this car?
STI Solterra.
Well, they're doing that. That's a whole nother discussion. But I wonder, did they want to hold back on the drivetrain? Yeah. Because, hey, there's so much demand. If this TR doesn't sell the way that we want it to sell, or hit the mark that we want it to hit, maybe, literally all they'd have to do is put in the STI drivetrain and maybe a wing on the back. Which apparently, that's this other weird thing, is apparently in, I think, Australia, there is an option for an STA wing on this WRX TR. Because in these other markets, there's a precedent set for non-STIs having the STA wing, but because that precedent is not set in the US, they're not giving us the wing.
It gives me a headache, the whole thing.
It does. Well, and the other thing is, like, really, almost like the drivetrain is what, in large part, defines what an STI is, or what makes it an STI.
Sure.
It'd probably be a little tweak in power, and then the drivetrain.
Yeah.
Because I could also guess that Subaru is sitting there thinking, well, we're not the drivetrain that we have in the car has been fine with the previous power level. We're not tinkering with the engine package or the power level. So there's no need to upgrade the drivetrain. So maybe that's the definition in their mind of what constitutes an STI or requires it to be called an STI, is like that little bump in power, and then the drivetrain that just brings with it that extra capability.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder, though, on the more negative side of this coin, is this Subaru's Evo 10?
Could be. It truly could be. The price point is the weirdest part of this. So Subaru has now said, I believe I have this right, that this is now going to be the top trim level of the WRX. So prior to this, it was the WRX GT, which has largely all the same interior stuff that the WRX TR has. It's got the Recaros and all that jazz. The WRX GT only comes with the CVT, and it has the crazy adaptive suspension, the cool adaptive suspension. And that starts at $44,000. So when that one was announced, the weird part there was, so you have a base WRX, which is 32. Now there's this top trim level of a WRX, which is 44, which is $12,000 more, which is already kind of in the ballpark, if not slightly more of the difference of what the previous WRX and STI was. And now this WRX TR is supposed to slate even above that. And I think Subaru has to decide if they want to sell a bunch of cars or not. Because, the estimates that I'm seeing with this WRX TR is that the guesses are it's going to be somewhere between $45,000 and $48,000. At 45, it's just a skosh more than the GT. I mean, they probably have a sense of whatever the market the GT has, and who's willing to who sees value in a WRX to pay $44,000 for or so. Is this TR going to be about in that same ballpark? And I think if they go too much higher, like at 48, gosh, I mean, think about all the cars that all of a sudden now this WRX is
at the price point that the TR is probably going to be at. Yeah, it's kind of putting itself into a different category of cars that it's fighting with now. I mean,
but everything's marched up, right? And the Crosstrek is 30-some thousand now.
Yeah,
and the Crosstrek is one of the cheapest cars you can get, or the cheapest in Subaru's lineup, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, I mean, we were looking at the Crosstrek Wilderness, which just came out, and that car starts at 35. Yeah. The Crosstrek Wilderness starts at 35, 3,000 more than a WRX.
Yes, but you're not leaving the showroom for less than 40, probably.
Right, they're totally different cars, but it's like at that. I mean, it's almost, it highlights again how much value is in a WRX at $32,000. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, that kind of makes it a crazy value. But then, like, the opposite end of the spectrum, like, if this WRX TR is 48, like, oof, I don't know.
Yeah, that's where it's really difficult for me in like, thinking about this car is I don't necessarily appreciate the release for the car. I appreciate it for the parts more than anything else. Like,
true.
I'm excited that they're going to have all these things available, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like the small changes that they've made are worth that, like, $16,000 potentially jump in price from a $32,000 base model WRX to whatever this TR ends up at.
Because what's a big brake kit cost?
Yeah, exactly.
And that is significantly better than any OEM Brembo.
Well, I mean, this being the 6 pistons, the 340 front, 328 millimeter rear kits. I mean, we've put these kits together, for people that wanted to put them on the previous WRX, and I think with the calipers, pads, rotors, and everything up front, it's like, was it $2,300, $2,400?
Yeah, in the realm of like 3,000.
It's called, the rears would be maybe 2,000, something in that ballpark.
And then, I mean, coilovers is like really kind of the only other thing that they've let's done.
So let's call it $5,000 for brakes. Coilovers, good set of coilovers, $2,000. So now we're at $7,000.
Make a really good set. Make it $5,000.
Well,
we're making a better than TR for cheaper than TR. That's what we're accidentally doing here, by the way.
I think,
sorry.
Well, no, I think, but this is the calculus that people are going to do, right? The biggest differences are going to be in the interior. Because, so like with the Recaro seats, you can't just, there's not a single part number for the Recaro seats. That's just not how it works. Now, down the road, maybe some of these things will hit the secondary market and you can get them used for, $1,000, $2,000. But that's gonna be a while, and I don't think there's gonna be a lot of them out there. I mean, you could go with aftermarket Recaros. But then
an aftermarket seat is one of the best things you can do for driver comfort, control, performance, and saving weight, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think that's a moot point.
Well,
unless you want the brand name and you want the stitching, or whatever, and you want to go
With
sit
the
at Cars and
heated
Coffee
seats or
and
whatever.
I would kind of think that if you want the Recaros in the level of interior, because with that fancy center console, I mean, I think that was it the limited trim that gets that or something like that starts at like 38. So then if you want that fancy interior, the TR, if it's 45-ish thousand, it kind of makes sense versus like getting, just a regular limited and then putting stuff onto it. But yeah, I mean, if you just want value for money, getting a base WRX and just putting on the brakes and then doing a set of coilovers, I mean, especially if it's 48,000 for this car, I mean, you'd be like in about $7,000. So 39, you're almost $10,000 difference if you get the base, and if the power is exactly the same, which would you rather do?
Yeah.
Buy a GD.
Well, and that's where I think Subaru's got to decide, like, do we want to sell these cars? Because see, if they price this car at say 40, which would not be completely crazy because we just kind of walked through what the cost of this was. They're taking off a brake and they're replacing with the brake. So even the cost to Subaru is going to be less than what we just described.
And we haven't had hands on them, but from what it seems, these Brembos are pretty much just the Type RA calipers that they already have.
Yeah.
It's not like a new, groundbreaking caliper design that they've come up with.
Which is it is a very good. It's the most capable brakes that have come on a Subaru.
It's tried,
but it's still
proven,
not.
But already there.
Right, but it's still not as good as a full track brake setup. Like if you really start aggressively tracking the car, this will get you further than anything else that the STA came with. But you're probably going to hit a point where either the cost of pads is prohibitive, the life of the pads because they're so thin becomes prohibitive, or the cost of the rotors because this is especially on this WRX. It's a different hat height. So like the spacing of the rotor and the hat is different, so it's going to be.
That's annoying.
Yeah, it's a lot shallower.
That's dumb.
Yeah, so it's going to be a unique rotor, so there's not going to be a whole lot of choices for a bit. So I mean,
so get a GD.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from like my perspective as like the budget conscious enthusiast, it for me makes a lot more sense to come at it from getting a more base model car, moving into the parts from the TR, which is awesome that they hopefully are going to have all these available from the Subaru catalog.
Yeah.
The other cool thing that I don't know that we touched on a bunch is the new steering rack in the TR is supposed to be tuned in some way, quicker ratio. Yeah. So it could be that, this rack to the VA WRXs is as the 15 rack is to the older cars. I'm not sure if that's going to be the same or not.
Because it's electronic assist, I don't think it's an electric assist rack, and so I don't think it's going to be as easy to move into like the prior WRXs.
Well, but I guess I'm also kind of alluding to maybe like a 2022 base model that doesn't have this upgraded steering rack from the TR. So hopefully that will be another thing we can suss out and see if it is actually like quicker ratio or what they've done. Yeah, I haven't
with the electric motor as the assist, like that's I wonder if it's actually physically even a different rack or if it's just how the electric motor assists is what is different. Because if it's how the electric motor behaves, then it would literally be like the programming of the rack that's different. Maybe not the physical rack, or probably
just electric assist, right? It's not electric rack. It's not a full electric. It's just
it is full electric.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Thanks. Get a GD.
Well, I like the rack in the new WRX. What they did that's different is it's a dual pinion rack. So your steering wheel and the steering column is still a direct physical connection to the rack.
Okay.
The electric motor's on the opposite side.
Oh yeah.
So
it's not fully disconnected, is what I was getting. Okay.
No. That's what's interesting about this rack is that you have the assist. So like where it needs to be easy, it's easy. Where if you want the steering to be heavier in feel,
but they still can't make it faster with programming at that point because you still have a pinion that's moving.
No.
But that's what I wonder is. Did they actually up the ratio like the 15 rack to the GDs, or is it just tuning like we were just alluding to?
But
maybe it is
because there's like the steering angle sensor is going to determine how the motor behaves. And that's where I wonder if you'd run into it's not going to be reverse compatible because it would screw up the programming for how the motor helps out.
Oh yeah. I get what you're saying. But still, I'll say for cheaper, you can get a 12.5 to 1 rack for a GD.
True. Oh yeah. I mean, there's so much potential in this chassis. I mean, I like that Subaru is kind of basically giving all the best stuff off the parts bin, to it. But it's just, if this was $40,000, it would almost be a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's $48,000, then that's where, like, geez, I just don't know. It'll be interesting. It's going to be a very cool car. I mean, if money is no object, is it the one to get? Sure, probably. But I mean,
if money is no object,
money's kind of an object.
don't get a Subaru.
Yeah, I was going to say, if money is no object at that price
you're
point,
looking
there's a lot of things that you're going to be shopping for.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cars that could probably mop the floor with that
WRX for street
TR.
stuff. Yeah, if you're going to make a rally car, then yeah, there's probably not a better new off-the-shelf option right now.
Yeah.
For a 4-wheel drive turbo rally car.
Yeah.
But for street stuff,
yeah,
get Audi.
It'll be interesting. So, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about this car. I think what we need now is we need to know what price it is. We need it to land and just kind of see what the actual hands-on feel of it is. Like, what does it actually like to drive? Is it, if you were going back to back between just a regular WRX and this TR, is it like so different, like that the driving feel is that much different that like that sets it apart? Justifies whatever the difference is. Hopefully.
It feels like a filler car to me.
Yeah.
This is part of the two-mindedness I have about it. Like, yeah, cool. But it feels like a 2-year parts bin car while they work on something behind the scenes. And
the other thing that's interesting about this that is a slight bummer is that they did not come out with just like a track package. So the previous WRX, if you wanted the Brembos, you could just add the track package and get the Brembo brakes. So it was you could add that to whatever WRX you wanted, versus now you have to get this specific trim level, at least currently. And I guess to be fair, we haven't seen the 2024 catalog yet, so maybe this will be something, but because it's on this, maybe it will be a trim level that you can upgrade a base to.
I mean, yeah, that would be the ideal for this release, I think, for the budget-conscious enthusiast, is like, if they offered all of these as add-in, package options, say you want the brakes and the Recaros, or whatever you want to piecemeal together, that would be the ideal. If they just have the TR, if you don't want to think, you want everything, this is the one. If you don't want everything and you want to pick, spec out your base model.
And maybe that's coming. Maybe this is the 24, which is the release of the parts on the chassis, and then in 25. The TR is still there, but then now you have a track package, which is like just the brakes and maybe the upgraded suspension that you could put on a base. I don't know.
If you wait till 25, there will be that many fewer GDs out there floating around the used marketplace.
That is true.
So don't wait.
I will tell you.
Many more GD parts will be discontinued.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
Continue factory support for the GD. Stop putting brakes on new chassis.
Hashtag
save the
hashtag
GDs.
save the GD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The real people's rally car.
So, man, well, there was some interesting. Since you bring up the GD, we ran into some interesting parts that are discontinued for that car.
What?
There was 2 of them. I'm forgetting one, but the crazy one. So our rally car, the new chassis, no 2 WRX, a GD. If you're gonna have a rally car, the front lower control arms are consumables, basically. You hit things and they bend. Subaru has discontinued one of the WRX control arms.
What do you mean one? Like one side?
I think I want to say it's the right side
That's
is
dumb.
discontinued.
This is a dumb thing.
Now my hope is.
Made Tasso very sad.
I know. Now my hope is that maybe
Yeah,
it's just going to be like a part super session or something, and it'll come back.
Huh.
But the thing is that for a rally car, the WRX arms are more ideal because they're steel versus the aluminum arms on the STI. Well, the reason being is this is exactly what happened. So the car that we had aluminum arms on it. We hit something, and it got bent. So the metal pin at the back got bent. Mm-hmm. So the roadside fix for that, the rally fix, is you take your tow rope out.
Yeah, you can't pull them back out.
Yeah, you put it around a tree, You do a couple of reverses, aggressive reverses to bend the thing back so you can at least drive sort of straight, and then you carry on the stage, get through transit, get to the service, and put a new control arm in. The guys tried to do that and shattered the arm in 3 places.
Aluminum's not a big fan of that move.
No, it'll bend once and that's it, and then it's just shatter time. But so like the fact that Subaru's discontinued that arm, like I hope it's going to come back. I hope they're going to do something, but it's like that's kind of wild.
I think I still have some, so $5,000 per arm.
Right.
And just put it out there.
Yeah.
You'll be like that Ollie Burrows motorsport guy, just start squirreling away all the GD parts.
All the right-sided lower control arms are mine.
Yeah. No, I mean, to be fair, there's aftermarket parts available.
Yeah.
But it's just like that Subaru is doing that for this. I mean, I'm going to call it a consumable part for people that are rallying the car, which is like so much of the heritage of this car. It's kind of
that's a bit troublesome. Yeah. But that's fine.
I hope they're not going to do something with the left, but I mean, signs kind of point that they're moving in that direction.
Yeah, stop hitting stuff on that side.
I remember what the other part was. This one was, I remember now because it was dumbfounding. The stock downpipe is now discontinued.
Oh, that's right. We did see that.
I got one of those. $50,000.
$50,000, yeah. I guess it's not so surprising, but at the same time, like when you have a car where it's now old enough, 20 years, where like you could run into a point where it legitimately would need to be replaced, and now you can't. And now there are states where Colorado, which is the case, California, so forth, where you have very limited options of what you could put on the car to keep it running. And the factory option is like one of the top options. And now that that's discontinued, that's interesting. Now, my hope with that one is that like catalytic converter raw materials were just skyrocketing in cost for a while, but it seems like they've plateaued and they're coming back down again. So what I'm kind of hoping is that it's gonna like the price is gonna come way down. Maybe they discontinued it because it was absurdly expensive, but now there's gonna be a much cheaper way to manufacture it, and then it'll come back. But there's we've talked about it on this podcast before about like some of the electrical components, the steering, the wiper transmission that is kind of a known failure point.
I had a customer reach out about a GD ECU. And it's basically only what's in stock. I think there were automatic ECUs left in some warehouses, and that's all they've got.
Right, and they're not reproducing them.
There's a lot of stuff like that that's coming down the pipe.
Decriminalized standalones.
Right. Yeah.
Any leg for the masses.
Yeah. I mean, it's I get it. I can't say that it's surprising, but at the same time it's surprising.
Yeah, 20-year-old cars now.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of them on the road, and so I mean, there's gonna be options out there for a good while. But it's just one of those things where, like, it is a rally car. I mean, it's like, well, gotta like really kind of suss out how much is of the aftermarket support is out there for like these lower control arms. I mean, I think everybody's gonna secretly.
This is how Subaru is trying to get more competition. Now you have to run the new chassis if you want a rally car. Ugh.
Yeah, the ARA is behind all of this. Preston.
Oh man, I don't know. You look at all of this, and it's clear that Subaru's in a transitional period.
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking down the road. They're trying to figure stuff out. They're trying to figure out what direction they need to go in and what makes sense. But I can understand it on one hand in that, like, if you have all these 20-year-old cars that you're still producing parts for, I mean, there's a cost to produce the part. You have to probably do reasonable size runs. You've got to store it somewhere for the initial production. Then you have to ship it literally across the world and then distribute it to all your warehouses. And I think as they're realizing that they're moving to these new platforms where they just kind of want to move beyond all of the old parts so they can make room for the new parts. So
yeah. What it makes me, when I'm sitting here thinking, I'm kind of smiling to myself. Because my first thought was, whatever, but there's two kinds of people. There's the folks that sit there kicking and screaming as the future happens to them, and the folks that embrace what's coming, right?
Yeah.
And what I think to myself is something we've talked about, like there's no like core to the Subaru community anymore. You know, a little bit. It's a little lost.
It's fractured a bit. Yeah.
It needs an adult. Maybe this brings it back there. Because really, we're in no worse a spot than the community was when it was getting going. Before flat bills and vapes, there was a core community.
Before the WRX.
It was hot rodders, right?
Yeah.
Maybe fuel injected, maybe a turbo 4-banger, but they're hot rodders. And so maybe this brings the community back to the, hot rodding roots where it's, all right, we can't get ECUs to work anymore, or we can't get ECUs anymore, we can't get lower control arms anymore. Let's support this aftermarket part. Let's come up with this fix. Let's problem solve, kind of stuff like that. And so maybe it helps kind of save us from the Hondification that Subarus had gone through for the last several years, or puts us back in where Hondas are nowadays, which is very much a cool hot rodding community, in my outside opinion of the whole thing. So it gets us out of 10-year ago Honda, and we catch up to where Honda guys are now with like their core community kind of thing.
Yeah. So you're 100% right. We're at this point where like the early to mid 90s Hondas, which were some of the most desirable platforms, the Civic and the Integra, were 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that weird spot is that like when a car is new, when the engine is new, whatever, the cost to the aftermarket to develop a part is really high because there's nothing out there. You don't know what's going to work exactly. You don't know what's needed exactly. So there's a lot of research and development that has to go into figuring out even what parts you need to make. Then you have to figure out how to make them. Mm-hmm. Then you make them, you produce them, and things are expensive. The example here that comes to mind is like Civic and Integra exhaust manifolds. Like there was a period where like the really good manifolds were, this is, in the early aughts, if you will, $1,000, $1,200 for a little Integra or a Civic manifold or whatever, because the companies that came out with those had to do a lot of research and development to build it right, get it to work, do the dyno back and forth, like, okay, you're going to pick up this much power with our header. Mm-hmm. Like it really is like a tuned header. It really does work. It does what it says. Then that gets you through the first like couple of years. Mm-hmm. And then some other company sees that, like all of us, like
the eBay phase, the Chinese knockoff phase.
That's the problem.
The will this fit my Honda phase.
That's the difficult period, because then all of a sudden, like all you have to do is see a picture of a thing, and you get 85% of the idea.
4 bananas in a T4 flange. Let's go.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so then everybody starts scrambling to duplicate it, and then you might have 3 headers that all look the same. Mm-hmm. Quality of materials, the fitment is not going to be the same. Mm-hmm. The end result is not going to be the same necessarily, but the cost is like literally a fraction by the end of what it once was. Comtech headers at one point were, I want to say, it was like $1,200 for a header, and then like way at the end, like they'd stopped producing them for a long time. I had a conversation with Dana Comtech, and they're like, it just doesn't make any sense because it costs us so much to produce them, and then there's all these knockoffs that are, I want to say like $250 at the time, and I think at the very, very end it was like literally $100 to get a header that looked exactly like the Comtech header. Mm-hmm. And it's just, how many people understand what the difference is for the really fancy, developed, high quality part and are willing to spend that money on it? Plus, at the same time, in the background, the value of the cars is depreciating. Mm-hmm. The cars are getting older, the mileage is getting higher, the purchase price of the car is getting lower and lower and lower. There was a point where, you could buy the Integra for $2,000, and then how many people that bought the Integra for $2,000 would spend $1,200 on just the header? Because it's got 250,000 miles on it and all this sort of jazz. Like that's the
right.
Doesn't make sense, and then you get to the point about 10 years ago where those cars are 20 years old. Acura starts discontinuing a ton of parts. And then so like all the really fancy produced parts, those guys have largely stopped making them because it just doesn't make financial sense anymore. And then Honda stops producing things. And so then now all you're left with is the aftermarket, and like a lot of the good quality options in the aftermarket have gone away. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of we're starting to move into that zone with the GD chassis a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it doesn't go like.
But look at what it's done with Hondas. They now have legendary motors, right? And some new legends, right? K-Swap the World and stuff. Maybe EJ Swap the World is coming up. Because some of these motors have become legendary because they're so, in my opinion, so researched, so defined, so fine-tuned by certain folks that can do it. Not the cheap folks, not the cheap, eBay parts, but like the Boosted Boys is, for the Honda stuff up in Fort Lupton or wherever they're at up there. They have this thing down to such an art, and I think that there are EJ manufacturers or Subaru aftermarket parts houses that are getting down to that fine art place where there's not a whole lot of unknown territory left for Subarus, especially some of the older chassis. Now you can buy a book on how to build if you still buy books, on how to build a GC rally car that has all the tricks like, hey man, we've seen this failure in 98 out of 100 GCs that we built, so maybe you should do this kind of thing, right? And so it's because it's a known path, you can start to fine tune that path. You're not having to branch out and do these big R&D costs on research. You're now doing the D part of the R&D, where you're developing and fine tuning stuff. And I'm excited about some of the stuff that we're doing with like the new race car motor for our new car, because it's some of these things hopefully coming to fruition, and maybe we start getting K series levels of power, reliability, all this kind of stuff, swappability, because as the OEM thins out, as the aftermarket becomes the only solution, then the fluff floats to the top and gets swept away to the next cool thing that's going on.
Well, what happens is you get, like, once you get to that state, and then you get 2 or 3 years down the road in it, where let's just say you don't really have any really good options or really high quality, highly developed, highly tested options. You get into this point where, like, well, I bought all these things, I have all the pieces of the puzzle, I'm putting it together, but it's not working like it should. Like, all of a sudden, it starts to become apparent what the difference is, because you can get like the very cheap headers, the very cheap engine components and stuff like that, but you're not getting the results that the guys were getting maybe 7-8 years ago with all these parts that were available at the time that were more expensive, but are now discontinued because, like, that there is that difference. And then once you hit that point and get through it for a handful of years, that's exactly what you're describing. All of a sudden, it's like there's
the transient crowd leaves.
A new appreciation for the value of what was available when people were willing to spend $1,200 on a header versus not.
Obviously, that is also a little dependent on brands taking advantage of the research that's been done in the past, right? Like, brands have to find a good footing, take advantage of this development and, capitalize on it. And the hope is, we want them to do that. Like, we found some great companies that we work with now, and hopefully more going forward will provide aftermarket support for EJs and all of the different Subarus that we support.
It's actually a topic that it's been on my mind for forever, and it's something like, if you work in this industry, it can't not be on your mind, because what we just have discussed is always in the back of your mind, but how do you approach it? Which is like the value of which component you buy. The thing. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, but where you spend your dollars does matter, because like all these Comtech is the example. If through the whole progression of people modifying, Hondas and Acuras and such, it was always understood what the value was in that header. That header would never have gone out of production. Now, I mean, it gets hard to a certain extent when there are, other options out there that are close, maybe even equivalent, but for less, because the R&D dollars didn't have to get spent. I mean, Comtech by and large, actually kind of went under at one point and came back as CT Engineering, and now CT Engineering is largely gone because like that market just eroded. If there was always an appreciation for the research and development that Comtech and CT Engineering did for that platform, and the dollars were spent with that manufacturer, they would not have had likely as many issues staying afloat, keeping going, producing parts, and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess, probably don't want to go down too far in this road, but you really like where you spend your dollars does matter.
Yeah.
And spending with the companies that are doing the research and development, finding the solutions to these problems, producing the high quality parts. Even if there's a cheaper option that's like 80% is good, but if they're not the company that's doing the research and development, like if you lose the company that's doing the R&D, that's a much bigger hit long term to all of us as enthusiasts than if we lose the company that's not doing the R&D. If that makes sense.
But you can stand in your grave yelling until you use the grave about how you should do a better job as a person at the people, but it has to happen naturally. And I think it happens naturally when people don't have a choice and the tides just change, right? And I mean, there are folks now, many of the most, if you've asked for, it's not forums anymore, on a Facebook group. So if you ask for help on a Facebook group and you're met with jaded responses that are pretty correct, that person probably has been sitting here for 10 years thinking to themselves, I wish people would just respect where the R&D came from. And now it's time to really start listening to those people because they're still there, they're vetted, they're in it. So start appreciating those people, and you will do a lot for the future of whatever industry or sport or car that you're into, because then that's how, the what am I looking for? The fluff, the chaff, whatever is gonna float off the top of this community here-ish, now-ish, right? And there will be probably dregs of the folks that are still trying to make their money, their quick dime, and get out, right? We're not over the hill yet, but I think.
Well, speak for yourself.
Well, okay, you're old. But no. It's not a light switch that changes. It's a progression, and this isn't my primary industry and stuff like that. So I'm saying this all kind of from the outside looking in, but in my opinion, we're moving towards that progression now of like the cool mature years of the silver fox years of the Subaru car community and stuff like that. And it's interesting, kind of to bring this back, that there is stuff like the TR happening, right? And it almost kind of, I don't know what that is. If that's like the just for men hint of gray or something like that for the Subaru community, or what I mean, especially looking at electrification of stuff, and stop bringing politics into electrification. I don't care. This is the number one thing I still see. Like, well, you have to mine the stuff from China. I don't. Just stop. No one cares. It's not about that.
It's moving. There's when we drove the Solterra, like it was eye opening in many ways. But the biggest eye opener was how different it was. It just redefined what the driving experience could be in like going off road and using a car off road. Like what the potential is there for using that kind of motivation in a chassis in that environment. Like it is completely different, which makes total sense because hey, it's completely different. But like when you realize like what the benefits could be, I mean, I'm excited about it. I'm curious to see what can be done.
I love my race car, or my race cars, my internal combustion motors. I love my dirt bike. It's a two-stroke. It's horrible for the environment. It's not about the environment. I am a pro-environment person, but this is not even a beginning of electrification. I'm going off on a big rant, but here it is. So,
all right.
I mean, I'm already kind of halfway through it, so you're good. You're already buckled in. But if I see one more person posting a picture of a diesel generator next to an electric vehicle charging station, like, yeah, cool, thanks. Great meme. Sweet. Go run for office if you care that much. Stop posting to Facebook. Go run for office and ban diesel generators or electric cars. I don't care which one, but just stop posting about it on Facebook. It's not about that. Electric cars are cool, and they are where the industry is going right now. So just get over it. If you don't want that, go start your car company and make a different one. It is what the community is, that the industry is going towards. Yeah. We've always been a minority as sports car people, performance enthusiasts. We've always been a minority of this community, or of the automotive industry. And so we can't compare what we're doing with what's going on. I am in no way endorsing or fighting electric cars or environmental stuff. I'm just saying that's not part of this conversation anymore.
Well, I think what it comes back to is the enthusiast group. And really, if you break it down, there's two different enthusiast groups. Mm-hmm. And I think the position that Subaru's in, and all car manufacturers really at this point, short of something like Tesla, where there is no internal combustion history, there is no internal combustion enthusiast group, is you've got two people, you have two groups of people that you need to keep in mind and kind of make products to fit what their wants are, what their needs are. And I think that on the electric side, Subaru has to kind of figure out what that looks like, because honestly, I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But I think the key is you can't forget the other side of it in the internal combustion enthusiast group, because there's a lot of cars out there. This is your enthusiast group that's already established. By and large, they already have the cars. They have the stuff. They have the enthusiasm. It's already there. It's not something new that needs to be like kind of fostered and developed. It's already there. And if you just completely ignore and move on, then that's where you run a risk of like having this gap where like you lose a lot of the enthusiasm behind the brand.
Who's you in this statement? The manufacturers?
The manufacturers.
Yeah. But in my opinion, they abandoned the performance market a decade ago.
Yeah.
Right? It's not because of electrification. It's because of the softening of the consumers' wants, right? Once the SUV became the only type of car you could get, whether it's a crossover or an extra large or a large or a super mega, you only have SUVs as an option nowadays.
Right.
We're abandoned, right? And then the post-retro muscle car thing is neat, I guess, right? It's another horsepower war. The diesel trucks went through another horsepower war. But for a market, they weren't selling performance cars. They were selling stand-ins for your own virility, right? It's essentially a Viagra commercial is all you get. Every car manufacturer just sells Viagra now. That's not... for context, I'm tired, and I get more cynical when I'm tired. So take all of this, whatever grains of salt you want. I'm not actually a negative person, but I do love talking trash. And it's, I don't think the electrification of cars is the threat to the performance or the tuner market or the competition world or anything like that. It's the fact that the masses don't care, and we're sitting in our little foxhole here yelling at the world for moving on past us, kind of thing, right? And we should just be happy with our little foxhole here and be like, yeah, sick. It leads to the positivity and the maturity in the tuner car culture if we're like, we are irrelevant. I accept that, but here's all this cool shit that we're doing in our irrelevance. Like, we wouldn't have, I don't think, emissions problems as much now in terms of having to like maintain compliance if we didn't make such a huff about like, pay attention to us. And instead we're like just happy in our little corner of the world, like, hey, what's up, consumers? Nice cup holders. I see you got a bunch. I'm gonna be over here making fart can noises with my fart cannon. Right. It's just let us be us in our little world and stop trying to be the biggest deal.
Maybe. Dylan, you've been awful quiet.
Yeah,
what's your thought?
I'm ruminating. This
is a hard one, and this is not what we had kind of. This is not the path that we had kind of planned.
So go buy a WRX TR.
Yeah. I think right now we're, like we've talked about, we're in a really interesting state where there's a lot of car enthusiasts that are still super attached to internal combustion engines because of the kind of access that they provide, like the amount of research that people have done in the past on internal combustion.
It's a known quantity.
Yeah, there's so many modifications you can do. There's so many ways to crack the ECU, figure out how to do these modifications to get the performance you want out of it.
Yeah.
Right now, I think, for me personally, as an enthusiast, the biggest hurdle into like being into electric cars isn't the power or the performance of them. It actually has to do with the, manufacturer support for an enthusiast that wants to get that electric car.
Yeah.
Like, for someone to have, say, like, DCCD control on an electric car, you've got to be looking at, like, a really high level, like, model, trim level model.
Yes.
And, we've seen some precedent for some aftermarket support coming into that now with, like, the Model 3s, like what Tony brought in.
Yeah.
He had, like, a piggyback motor controller on his Model 3, so he could control the front and rear power bias and stuff like that.
Well, and the Model 3 and Model Y Performance now has a track mode, which gives you that.
Yeah. So, like, there's this sort of coming of age with, like, the electronic enthusiast space, I think that's maybe going to come down the line soon, where the manufacturers are going to realize, we need to find a way to bring these internal combustion enthusiasts into this new era. Like, how can we get someone who loves tuning their internal combustion engine to love tuning an electric car? Like, it might not always translate, but I think for me, there are things that they could do to bridge that gap and say, hey, look, like, you can tinker with these parts of the electric car in ways that you could in the past and kind of bring people forward. And that is one weird phase we're at right now. Is like, how are we going to do that? How is a Solterra or Subaru's next electric car going to excite someone that might buy a WRX or might buy that as a commuter car?
So much of what we do as enthusiasts is get the car to work a certain way, feel a certain way, or like handle a certain way, do a certain thing that we want it to do. And it's the ability to make that change and feel the benefit, or really dial the car into what we want or what we expect. I would say that's probably the core driving force behind the majority of what we do. I mean, personalization and customization. With electric cars, that's a big question. That's one of the big things on my mind is like, am I going to have any options, or is it like you just have to magically find the new EV that checks all the boxes, and that because that's it, because you can't really fiddle with and tinker with this thing.
Yeah, and I would agree that it feels like we are in this in between phase now, like you guys were talking about, where these new cars they're releasing, they're kind of trying to appeal to enthusiasts in some ways, but then it falls short in a lot of ways for people who are like really at their heart, like a rally driver who wants to look at cars from that perspective of, well, how can I develop this into something I can compete with? Now it's hard to have that mindset with some of the new electric chassis.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's part of why there's this sort of like middle ground coming out with the new WRXs and all of that, the TR. But hopefully going forward, things just continue to grow.
Well, and I think it's, to a certain extent, it's us as enthusiasts being clear with some of the manufacturers of what we're hoping for and what we want. I mean, from these cars, and I mean, that's going to come down to what people buy. Certainly. We vote with our wallets. Sometimes that's the most effective way to do it. I just think the other thing, I guess, related to this that I just think is worth saying is that I think car manufacturers specifically really obsess on new cars sold. They zero in on new cars that are sold, and it's almost like they forget that, hey, you make parts for cars and you sell parts too. I mean, maybe the money that's made on part sales is not what it is on selling cars.
Yeah, I would guess it's nowhere near, right?
Well, maybe, but honestly, maybe not. I mean, maybe not for a specific model or for a specific part, but I mean, I don't know.
Service packages probably is where they make their big money, right?
Well, I guess the point is that like every Subaru part that we sell, even down to a $1 bolt, you got to figure Subaru's making something on that. How many bolts are sold across the country, across the world in a given year? There's got to be something there, and it just seems like especially when they're starting to really discontinue critical parts that keep these platforms usable and running. And guess maybe it's because we're in Colorado, we see some of these cars that are still on the road. But it seems like, well, you're kind of ensuring that the number of those cars that are on the road is going to dwindle down to the point where you're kind of forcing them into a newer platform or a brand new platform, and then just carry it on from there.
But that's sort of where I'm making my argument that we need to stop. Like, the manufacturer doesn't care, and I think it's fair for them not to care. That's capitalism in action, right? And we should stop yelling at them to care about us because they're not gonna, right?
Well, maybe, because I think there's a couple. I want to say BMW still makes a lot of old parts. Now, I think the delay in availability, it gets significant, and maybe the cost goes up.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
some brands I can think of that just kind of spurred up would be like Dodge's support of their older cars.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you guys have looked into this. My mom has an old Dodge van that she's trying to build, and like a lot of what some of the domestic manufacturers are doing with these classic brands is just bringing a modern take to that. Like, they offer these modern packages where they've got a crate motor, a transmission, everything is set up from the factory in the new configuration. It's got the newer V8, but it fits in the old setup. Right. So you can retrofit and have this, arrive and drive, or whatever they want to call them, package that, basically, we have an EJ25 STI package, like crate motor, transmission. It'll fit right in and run itself in any old GD WRX. Like, I can see a future where maybe Subaru has some kind of package like this, but it's a long road to get to something like that. And I know, like you were talking about with hot rodders and old domestic cars, like there has been that sort of coming around where there was a ton of support at first, things petered off, then the aftermarket came back around, and with the aftermarket showing that there's that precedent for these parts, some of these domestic companies have come back around and said, hey, you know what? We should release a motor trans combo that can go back in some of these old cars that people care about, because we want to support that.
I wonder how much of that is just an evolution of the crate motor concept, which has been around for millennia.
It's true, but Subaru doesn't really have much like that. Like,
no, but the thing that they have is the architecture that could utilize it, because like this is where like engine swaps and all this stuff.
The Lego.
Subaru Subarus are Legos. They've been using the same motor mounts for so long that like you could make if it has to be a direct injected engine to hit emission standards, whatever. There's no reason they couldn't put the ECU on the engine like a lot of these crate motors, so that it literally would just drop in. You plug it in, and like, hey, you now have an updated direct injected GD WRX.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder how much of the tying in of the wiring, because a lot of older American cars have separate engine management versus vehicle management kind of stuff, if they have vehicle management at all, or something like that. I wonder if it's more complicated, or if I'm just getting into the weeds on a general concept that is probably a good concept.
It is. There's a lot to think about with that. It would be really cool to see something of that nature with Subarus. Like, hey, we're discontinuing the parts on these GD chassis, but you know what? If you have this car and you need to restore it, we have a 2018 STI drivetrain equivalent that has everything, and it's got emissions compliant like gear, and you can just hook it up, and we've proved to the government that this is a better emission standard than the one that was originally in the car. And in Australia, like, there's huge precedent for that, and like what Mighty Car Mods did with putting the new STI chassis, like drivetrain into the Vorg and all that stuff. Like, they've found ways where it's legal for that car to be emissions compliant.
Right,
there.
right.
Yeah. The thing,
imagine if Subaru had factory support for something like that.
The thing where I grew up in California and in like 4-wheel drives and trucks and stuff is you could motor swap a car and have it be emissions legal as long as it met the emissions requirement of the more tight
The newer
vehicle, the newer 10 times out of 10 the newer vehicles went with the tighter emissions requirements.
Yep.
So like LS the world happened. Right.
Right.
Where everyone just slapped LSs and old stuff, and I wonder if even that's some of the motivation for Mopar doing stuff like this.
Totally.
Is they're like, well, shit, if we don't sell something, they're just gonna start putting GM parts in their old Mopars, right? And so like we got to get our toes in this water too, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen packages from both to that effect, where GM is doing, LSs with automatics, with whatever. Mopar's doing the same. It would be really cool if Subaru could find the precedent for that in our markets.
So it's a
build something like that.
Much smaller manufacturer in a much smaller market, right?
Right,
So
and that's
those two things
the biggest challenge.
I mean, there's 100 Mopar guys out there for every 4 Subaru guys, at any time, probably.
Yeah, probably true.
Rough number. That's based on extensive research, so that's proprietary.
Well, and I mean, the suspension components, and I guess it's maybe they know that there's enough aftermarket support that they just don't need to keep making it, and maybe they've seen that like the sales number have just dwindled to the point where like, I mean, heck, rally guys, if you're going through, I mean, gosh, I think we try and have at least 2 of each control arm as spares when we go out, maybe 3 of each. If you're not just trying to buy a control arm, you're trying to buy 6. Finding an aftermarket control arm that's like $50, $75, $100 less expensive than OE, well, maybe that's what most of the rally teams are doing. Maybe they're just seeing their numbers dwindle to the point where, all right, just let the OEs have it, or the aftermarket have it on that one.
Yeah.
But I would hope that Subaru's paying attention, and if ever the aftermarket drops the ball, that they will come back and make some stuff available. But I don't know, it just doesn't make sense or not. The thing about the SVX here, how much stuff is just not available for that car, that engine anymore. I mean, there are people that love them. I mean, Jeremy, our friend of the shop, has got one and loves that car. Has done a lot of stuff to that car, but it's just bananas how many more parts just keep making it so much more of a challenge to just keep that thing running. So,
You got a bunch of spares, right? A bunch of spare cars.
I think he does. I think he does. But but I mean, it's like if you push your enthusiasts group to that point where you have to have 3 SVXs so you can keep one of them running, I mean, that kind of changes the game a little bit. Going on a little bit here, we should probably wrap this up. How do we wrap this conversation up? I guess it's where the frustration comes for me is that I still love my old Subaru. I'm still passionate about the platform. I don't want to see these cool cars go away. And I guess it would be nice, like Subaru still brings out so many of these old cars to like SubiFest, where they revealed the WRX TR. They brought out the 22B, and they had an S202, the Bug-Eye S series.
Bucky Lassik's like Betty car was there, the GR like rally car that he's been using.
Subaru, that we love these old cars. Make sure that we can still keep them running, and that if there's ever some part that goes unavailable, you guys got to come back out with it or give us some kind of an option to keep these cars on the road, because that's in a lot of ways giving us as enthusiasts the ability to still keep these cars going. That's a huge part of what keeps us going. I mean, Subaru, I'm looking at you here for all these old cars, like the 90s WRXs and STIs that some enthusiasts are now finally able to import, like their dream STI. They wanted a version 2 STI, and you can actually get it now. But there's so many parts for those cars that are discontinued. Subaru, you got to just keep an eye on the things that are critical and bring it back. Just make sure that we can keep these cars running.
Stop bolting brakes to your land yacht WRX and stop.
I'm fine with that. Keep
Stop
doing
discontinuing old parts.
I'd say, at least the idea of the WRX TR means that they see there are enthusiasts who care about these things,
Yeah.
and they're trying to bring that into the new era. Like, that's my take from it. Is
Yeah.
there is a silver lining in everything. You know, it is a little lackluster. It could have an STI transmission, but it doesn't. But you know, it's something. They're showing that, hey, we hear you.
And
we're
maybe it still will.
trying. Yeah.
Maybe the door is still open. I hope the door is still open. But if not,
my cynical just got off work brain is sitting here thinking they're just trying to sell brake parts at a markup by putting them on a car.
well, and to be fair,
trying to
it
clear
means
the
that we'll
shelf.
be able to get those parts and make them available. So if you
Yeah.
get your base WRX and you want the TR Brembos, there's hopefully going to be an option for that.
Just release the electric STI.
Yeah.
Let me have one to make into a hill climb car.
Right? Make it not suck.
Yeah, the new STI EV concept. Just send one right to Tasso. He'll tell you what you need.
I'll take one. I'll run it for a couple years.
Yeah. Set some records.
I'll run my diesel generator to charge it just to keep everybody happy.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll see what happens from there.
Yep. I like it. Okay. So the new STI Solterra has got to be a fast, like.
Is it a Solterra? I was making that joke. It's not
No,
a
no,
Solterra.
that's what they've announced, that there is going to be a Solterra STI. I think,
Subaru.
next year. Well, which is like,
It'll
give
be
it
like the Forester Sport.
Whatever.
It'll have
No.
some red trim on it. It'll be great, guys.
don't do that.
Just
give us as enthusiasts, like, give it more than 200 horsepower. Swap out the motors, give it like 500 horsepower, and make it do 0 to 60 in like, I'm not going to be greedy, like 3.8 seconds.
Compete with the Ioniq 5N.
Yeah.
You know,
1.8
throw
is a
something,
reasonable
throw some
target.
back.
Yeah.
Hey, just
That's
stop doing that and just start making more control arms for old cars. Stop. Subaru hasn't made a good car since 2007.
Oh boy. Yeah. Okay.
I told you I'm fired up.
You're fired up. That's all right.
If you are out there right now and you feel like I haven't offended you yet, please comment below about what you care about, and I'll get it next podcast. So
We'll work it in.
But if you're still listening and you think Tasso's fired up, just hashtag get Tasso coffee
yeah,
or something like that.
I've had so much already.
Yeah. There's not enough coffee in the
I'm
world.
just gonna go back and keep building my old ass rally car.
That's right.
So
Just rail at the world by building an old rally car.
yeah, exactly.
Yes. So if you've got any thoughts, let us know what you think in the comments. Are we right on this? Are we wrong on this? Are EVs the future, or are GD control arms the future? You just let us know. Which camp are you in? EVs or GD control arms?
Are you a nihilist and there is no future? Have fun with your car while you still can.
Or that, like control arms, EVs, or nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
These are the three choices we have. So. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks for your support as always. Make sure you follow Tasso on OTC Racing on all the social medias.
They're all going to unfollow right now.
Well, because you got spoilers, but you got your car back.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Production
So,
is happening.
Yeah, cynicism aside, I love all you guys and all these cars, and everything's good. And I'm working on my car, so that's exciting.
Yeah, there will be
hopefully-
news soon.
Yeah, I don't know. There's constant updates at this
Plan.
point because it's back in the workshop. So it's I'm
That's a huge positive.
tinkering. Yeah, I'm gonna go back, make some new pin stands this afternoon,
All right,
and
sweet.
put it in the air and put a bunch of spacers on my wheels and try and figure out how to fit ET15 on a stock fender.
I think the answer is
It's not gonna work.
hammer and duct tape.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
The diagnostic
Yes.
hammer
Yeah.
will be your friend.
Start with step 1 and then ignore step 2.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for your support as always, and until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.